Did you know the only coup in U.S. history happened right here on American soil? And that it erased an entire black community? This is the story they didn't want you to know. The story of Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. Back then, Wilmington's black community was thriving. Black residents were building businesses, winning elections, and making real strides toward equality. But some white people couldn't stand it. The thought of blacks rising up and gaining power was more than they could handle. So, they started plotting, determined to crush this progress by any means possible. And for over a century, this story was erased from our history books, hidden from the public eye. Why? What were they trying to bury? Join us as we dig into the truth behind the Wilmington Massacre, the only successful coup in American history. So, how did it all come to this? Back in the late 1890s, Wilmington, North Carolina, was a rare beacon of hope in the South, a place where black and white communities actually worked together, sharing a promising future. This was even during the Reconstruction era, right after the Civil War, when the nation was still deciding what freedom would mean for black Americans. In Wilmington, that dream was coming to life. The heart of Wilmington's progress was a notable political alliance called the Fusion Party. It brought together black Republicans and progressive white populists and gave black residents genuine power in governance. Wilmington's black community, about 20,000 strong, was thriving. Black doctors, lawyers, teachers, and business owners were breaking barriers, not just in their communities, but on the city council itself, where 3 black aldermen held seats. Black folks were voting, making decisions, and even competing with white vendors in business. And then there was the Daily Record, Wilmington's black-owned newspaper, proudly of the Negro, for the Negro, and by the Negro. At the helm was Alex Manley, a fearless journalist who gave Wilmington's black residents a powerful voice. Just a generation out of slavery, black families in Wilmington were buying homes, creating wealth, and building a legacy. It was a powerful time, but that success didn't sit well with everyone. To the white supremacist leaders, especially those tied to the old Confederacy, Wilmington's progress was a nightmare. They saw it as Negro rule and hated the idea of black Americans holding any political power. A powerful group of white elites, known as the Secret Nine, launched the White Supremacy Campaign to crush Wilmington's black leadership, using fear and racism to stir up anger and resentment. As tensions grew, they pushed their agenda even further, issuing the White Declaration of Independence, a defiant statement that read, "We will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin." With this bold declaration, they made their intentions clear. Wilmington, once a symbol of black hope, was about to be thrown into chaos. These men were ready to reclaim white rule by any means possible, and they did. Do you know what happens when the media becomes a weapon of hate? In Wilmington, the answer was clear. It ignited a firestorm. It all began with a carefully orchestrated effort to suppress black voters during the November elections. White supremacist groups, like the Red Shirts, used violence and intimidation to ensure that the Democratic Party took total control. But this wasn't just about an election. It was about overthrowing Wilmington's multiracial government, and they weren't going to stop until they had erased it completely. One of the loudest voices behind this wave of hate was Alfred Moore Waddell, leader of the violent white supremacist group, the Red Shirts. Waddell didn't just fan the flames, he poured gasoline on them. On October 24th, 1898, at Thalian Hall, he gathered white men and gave a fiery speech, urging them to take extreme action to prevent black residents from voting or gaining political power. He framed black political involvement as Negro domination, a threat to white supremacy that had to be crushed.
Men, do your duty. This city, county, and state shall be rid of Negro domination once and forever.
Waddell's words were extremely terrifying. He even went so far as to say they should choke the Cape Fear with carcasses of black citizens. This wasn't just talk. It was a direct call to violence. But Waddell wasn't alone in this campaign of hate. The media played a massive role, especially in amplifying white supremacist fears. While Waddell was firing up the mob, The Daily Record, Wilmington's black-owned newspaper, tried to confront the lies fueling white supremacy. On August 18, 1898, Alex Manly, the editor, published a groundbreaking editorial challenging white supremacist narratives, particularly targeting statements by Rebecca Felton, a prominent white supremacist who had advocated for lynching black men to protect white women. Manly's editorial was daring. He called out the hypocrisy of white supremacists, suggesting that the real threat to white women often came from white men, not black men. He even hinted that some white women had consensual relationships with black men. This bold stand was exactly what white supremacists needed to further their narrative of Negro domination. The editorial spread like wildfire, and white-owned newspapers across North Carolina used it to inflame racial tension even more. Publications like the News and Observer spun lies, falsely claiming that black citizens were becoming far too bold and were stockpiling weapons and preparing for violence, a narrative designed to spark rage and fear. Fueled by these lies, Waddell didn't hold back. He told his supporters, "If you see the Negro out voting tomorrow, tell him to stop. If he doesn't, shoot him down in his tracks." With that, the red shirts sprang into action, organizing to intimidate and block black citizens from voting. They were ready to take the law into their own hands. Obviously, the media made it all too easy for white supremacists to justify their violent actions. It was the deadly mix of propaganda and hate speech that created the tension that would soon erupt into one of the darkest days in American history. If you want to help bring stories like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe. It makes a huge difference in spreading these untold truths. November 10, 1898 started as just another day, but for Wilmington's black community, it marked the end of everything they had worked so hard for, because this city was about to face the greatest assault America had ever known. On the morning of November 10th, Alfred Waddell led a mob of over 500 armed white men through Wilmington streets. Their first target was the Daily Record, the black-owned newspaper, led by editor Alex Manly. Although Manly had fled, the mob burned the office to the ground, destroying a vital black voice in the city. Afterward, the mob posed for photos in front of the smoldering ruins, celebrating their violent victory over the black community. But the mob didn't stop there. As they marched through Wilmington's black neighborhoods, the terror they spread was unimaginable. Families were hunted down, killed, or forced to flee. Some reports say as many as 60 black residents were murdered that day, but the true number will never be known. Armed militias, including the Wilmington Light Infantry and the White Government Union, joined the attack. They had guns, even a Gatling gun, overwhelming the unarmed black residents. Entire families scattered, with some seeking refuge in the swamps nearby. The violence was so extreme that it reached the very heart of Wilmington's government. White Republican Mayor Silas P. Wright, along with other elected officials, was forced to resign under threat of death. The city's leadership was dismantled in one swift blow. Waddell declared himself the new mayor, and this cemented the white supremacist takeover. As the city's government fell apart, black leaders like Joshua Halsey were targeted and killed, their families torn apart by the violence. Halsey's children, along with other survivors, fled into the woods, escaping the bloodshed that had already claimed so many lives. "They gave their lives to vote," said Hesketh Nate Brown, a descendant of Halsey. Though the physical destruction ended, the scars left by that violence would last generations, marking the beginning of an era of white supremacy that would shape Wilmington's political future for decades. The aftermath of the Wilmington Massacre was a total erasure of the black community, not just by guns and fire, but by law, intimidation, and a deliberate rewriting of history. The red shirts, that violent white supremacist mob, left a path of destruction in their wake and sent a message. Black political power in Wilmington was gone. This was a calculated strike at the heart of black progress and freedom. And the takeover was swift. Alfred Waddell, the man who led the violence, was made mayor. Think about what that meant to everyone watching. White supremacy wasn't just accepted, it was being celebrated and normalized. They moved fast to lock down black political power in the city. One of the biggest weapons? The grandfather clause. Devised by George Roundtree, a legal advisor to the coup leaders, it made voting nearly impossible for black men. If you couldn't read me a right or prove your grandfather had voted, you couldn't cast a ballot. Most black men couldn't meet these conditions, and that wasn't an accident. No, it was the whole point. This was one of the early steps that paved the way for Jim Crow and kept black voices silenced. Meanwhile, the media jumped in, not to tell the truth, but to spin falsehood. White supremacists created pamphlets and fake stories showing black residents as the aggressors and dangerous threats, even including staged photos. They wanted to shift the blame entirely onto Wilmington's black citizens, making it seem like the massacre was somehow their fault. This lie stuck, fueled by fear and propaganda, and it erased the reality of black suffering. And while Wilmington's black residents were fleeing or hiding for their lives, their world was being torn apart. Families were separated in the chaos, some finding safety in nearby towns, others hiding in swamps. Many would never see Wilmington again. They lost homes, businesses, and any generational wealth they'd been able to build up. Survivors faced more heartbreak as many of them didn't even know what happened to loved ones who were lost or killed. Some were thrown into rivers, others buried in secret graves. But for almost a century, history books, libraries, and public records either ignored or sugarcoated what happened, calling it an unfortunate event for both races. The men who led the massacre, people like Alfred Waddell and Charles Aycock, were hailed as heroes, with schools and parks named in their honor. This was a deliberate erasure of black wealth and generational legacies that has left a mark that's felt even today. Wilmington didn't elect another black official until 1972, over 70 years later. And the struggle isn't over. Look at the voter ID laws and racially gerrymandered districts. These are the very same tactics, dressed in modern clothes, used to keep black voices from being heard. They succeeded in suppressing a past and protecting a system built on the destruction of black lives. Wilmington's black residents were vilified and silenced, and for years their story remained buried. But even through the silence, the memory and the impact of the massacre stayed with those who survived and their descendants. Now, we bring it to light so we never forget. For decades, what really happened in Wilmington was hidden behind the label of a race riot. This term suggested that both black and white citizens shared the blame for the violence, but the truth is starkly different. As historians looked deeper, it became clear what happened in 1898. Wilmington wasn't a riot, it was a massacre, a planned, targeted attack by white supremacists to strip black citizens of their rights. And for over 100 years, that truth was buried. Piece by piece, though, that hidden history started coming to light. Books like The Marrow of Tradition by Charles Chestnut and Cape Fear, Rising by Philip Gerard helped expose what really went down in Wilmington and the lasting damage it caused. In 2000, the North Carolina General Assembly formed the 1898 Wilmington Race Riot Commission, a step toward acknowledging the massacre and its devastating impact on Wilmington's black community and the South at large. For so long, Wilmington tried to forget, but now the community is working to remember. Descendants, activists, and local leaders are standing up to reclaim the city's real story. They're renaming schools and public spaces that once honored the people responsible for the massacre. They're making sure that the victims aren't forgotten, with documentaries like this one, books, and public events all helping to restore the truth. In 2006, a state-commissioned report came out with a clear conclusion. The Wilmington Massacre didn't just end that day. It set off a century-long legacy of racial violence and voter suppression that echoed through the South. The battle to reclaim Wilmington's real history is about making sure injustices of the past are seen, addressed, and never repeat themselves again. As historian Tim Pinnock said, someone's going to write your history. You can let someone else write it, or you can write it. These efforts to tell the real story of Wilmington matter. We have to honor those who were lost and ensure that future generations know the truth. This history was stolen, but now it's being reclaimed and the fight continues. The Wilmington Massacre of 1898 isn't just a footnote in history, it's a powerful reminder of what unchecked racial hatred can destroy. In one devastating day, a thriving black community, full of dreams, hard work, and potential, was torn down. And this isn't just Wilmington's story, it's America's story. A story of lives, dreams, and legacies stolen, but never forgotten. If this story moved you, help us bring more hidden histories to light by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Together, we can ensure that stories like these are told, remembered, and used to build a better future for all.